Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Solo Stories with Meeks. I know it's been a minute, but I'm back, and we're going to start doing these more on a regular basis. This is Solo Stories number 14, and this is called Song for Roadcat, and this one's actually dedicated to my dad. This is a condensed version from Just Beyond the Firelight by Robert James Waller, and I will jump into it. I had a friend and colleague named Roadcat. I sometimes introduced him to strangers as my research associate. We worked together on cold gray afternoons, poring over books and papers while the wood stove quietly crackled its way through another Iowa winter. Sometimes he lay upon my lap and served as a round and honest book rest. He purred and occasionally reached down to turn the pages for me. In the spring, as the days warmed, he moved to the desk, clearing a space by pushing to the floor papers and pens and staplers and other implements of a writer's trade. He had come to us from a field of long grass behind our house in Columbus, Ohio. One day, when he was just a few inches long, my wife, Georgia, brought the migrant in for the customary saucer of milk. The long, soft pelage on his back and sides were predominantly black and gray. His chin was an off-white that flowed into a creamy tan along his chest and belly. Symmetrically perfect were his markings, and he watched his world through immense green eyes. I set him on my lap and said, "This is going to be a fine-looking cat." Taking him to the veterinarian for a checkup, I learned that my new friend had worms and ear mites and fleas and a serious case of bronchitis. "Is this a road cat?" I asked. The doctor smiled. "This is your genuine road cat." I drove home with 4 kinds of medicine. The kitten sat on the car seat, small and uncomplaining, watching me, bright face, hopeful. And so it was that Roadcat began his long ride with me on the great arrow of time. We turned the days and marked the pages together. We grinned at each other over sunny afternoons on the deck, and while he rested in the crook of my folded arm, we tilted our furry heads and stared high and hard at the lights of space just before dawn. Green eyes looking, blue eyes looking, wondering about ourselves and the others out there looking back. We did that for 12 years, plus a month or so, and we came to care deeply for each other. We came to a position of trust. I violated that trust only once, when a local cat fanciers announced a show limited to animals of pet quality. We could not resist. So Roadcat was carried off to the show, held as part of a week of community festivities in Waterloo, Iowa. He was terrified and panting as I carried him through the crowds, past the Ferris wheel and Midway Barkers, past Waylon Jennings' touring bus. Roadcat's world was the forest, the warm place under the wood stove, and a canvas deck chair in the summer. He required no conspicuous recognition to prove his worth, but his colleague apparently did. My wife, my daughter, and I wore blue t-shirts we had made that said Roadcat in bold black letters. I watched him closely in the great judging hall. He stared at me straight in the eyes. I could see he was disappointed with me, and I was ashamed. Normally, reserved around strangers, he tore at the paper lining in his cage, attempted to push through the metal top, and when the judge put him on the table for all to see, he tried to scratch the woman. He scored high on appearance. The judge said he has a wonderful coat and a beautiful face and the largest, prettiest green eyes I've ever seen. But sliding and fighting and slashing out for the nearest jugular vein, He failed in personality and was awarded a fourth place ribbon. After the show, he had nothing to do with me for some time. Gradually, he accepted my apologies and our friendship warmed again. Roadcat seemed to enjoy the little inanities we created around him. On pasta nights, his name was changed to Rodacata. When Georgia held her seasonal pottery sales at our home, he charmed the customers by sitting in a large pot and looking out at the commotion. He was the chief inspector for anything new in the house, including musical instruments, canoes, furnaces, you name it. He even tolerated my singing over the food I chose for him each morning. Seafood? I sang a verse of an old whaling song at the pitch of the electric can opener. Country style chicken or beef usually got him. San Antonio Rose in B flat major, and anything elegant, such as liver, kidneys, was served with a sprinkling of cold porter. In his habits, he was careful and gentle. He asked for little other than consideration and respect. He ate what was offered and left our food alone, except for my lunchtime glass of milk resting unattended on the table. He could not resist. Turning around, I would find him sitting by the glass, licking a milk covered paw that was his only sin. I reached a compromise by providing him a little milk in an old jelly glass decorated with etchings of Fred Flintstone. The early bronchitis had taken most of his voice, so when he wanted attention, he would lie on my computer printer while I typed, purr loudly, and look directly into my face. If that failed, he escalated his tactics by jumping into the box holding the printer paper and tearing the paper off the machine. Finally, if I was so insensitive as to further ignore his requirements, he would race around the house, across my desk, along the balcony railing, and eventually onto my lap. These, uh, these efforts seldom failed. I watched him turn a little gray here and there, but I suppressed melancholy thoughts of the inevitable. He maintained a young spirit, and even in his latter days could race 30 feet up a tree on any crisp spring morning. In late of September 1987, however, I caught a slight hesitation in his leap to the basement table where I placed his food, safe from the growling hunger of our dogs. If I had not shared that breakfast time with him all those hundreds of mornings, I would not have noticed anything, but it was there, an ever so slight hesitation, and he seemed to be eating less than normal. Then one morning, Roadcat did not appear for his dawn excursion. It was his custom to lie near my pillow at first light and wait for me to let him out. The routine was invariant. In the morning it was broken. I felt an unpleasant twinge in my stomach. I searched the house and found him lying in a chair in the back bedroom. I knelt beside him, spoke softly, and ran my hand over his fur. He purred quietly, but something was not right. The previous evening he had seemed strangely restless. He would get on my lap, then down again repeatedly. The last time he walked up on my chest and rubbed his cheek against mine. He was trying to tell me something. I took him to the vet, where the initial diagnosis was a kidney problem. After a few days, I brought him home. He was terribly weak and he could scarcely walk. So I laid him on a wool poncho where he stayed the entire night. In the morning, I carried him to his litter box in the basement and set him down beside it. He seemed disoriented and he stumbled. I noticed his right leg was limp. Back to the doctor, who called me the next day at home. He determined that Roadcat had had a stroke the previous night. The stroke had paralyzed his right side and left him blind. An x ray disclosed a tumor around his heart. There was little to be done. It was up to me, of course. Gathering myself as best I could, I drove through a red and yellow sunset to the veterinarian's clinic. My friend and colleague lay on a table with white paper under him. I sat down, and at the sound and smell of me, he raised his head up, came his ears, and his nose wrinkled. Through the room was brightly lit. The pupils of his green eyes were dilated as he strained for the light. I touched him along the neck, and there was a slight sound. He was trying to purr, but fluid in his throat would not allow it. I nodded to the vet and put my face next to my friend, trying somehow to convey the anguish I felt for him and for myself. I spoke softly, struggling with desperate intensity to tell him of my gratitude for his simply having been. Eventually, his head lowered, and it was done. Georgia and I carried him home in a blanket, and I buried him in the woods along one of the trails where he earned his living. Roadcat didn't just reside with us, he was a spirited participant in the affairs of our place. He was kind to us, and we to him. I remember when I came home in the evenings how he would move down the woodland path toward me, riding along on his little stiff legged trot, tail held high with a slight curl at the tip. I'd hunker down and we would talk for a moment while he rode over on his back and looked at me, blinking. Georgia and I put the shovel away, walked back into the darkness, and stood by the little grave. By way of a farewell, she said, "He was a good guy." Unable to speak, I nodded. He was, indeed, a good guy, and a true friend and colleague who rode the great arrow with me for a time, helping me turn the pages in some old book while the wood stove quietly crackled its way through the Iowa winters. And that is the end, folks, of A Song for Roadcat. I hope you enjoyed it. It was one of my dad's favorite stories, and I wanted to dedicate that to him, and I wanted to share it with y'all. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time on Solo Stories with Jay Meeks. Goodbye.